Okay, hi everybody. This is going to be a new idea on working around our briefs and around the way we work on the course foundation degree. What we're going to try and do here is essentially run an online course for the environment production for games module. I'm doing this because a lot of tutorials and things that you find for other for the ways of using 3D Studio Max and things like that. They're all really, really useful. And I think when people actually watch those tutorials and they follow them along, they get a lot more out of it, as opposed to listening to me talk in the classroom at the front, and then all of that kind of being forgotten or not being able to rewind and rewatch that kind of stuff. So for this module, right from the very offset, and by that I mean by looking at the original, at the brief from the offset, all on a video tutorial. So this is the introduction. Welcome to Environment to Games. So what we're going to be doing in this module isn't as complex as you would think. However, when you think about video games and the environments that are produced in video games these days, you got to remember that that games are becoming ever increasingly more detailed. And this detail is limited by two factors, really. The time to create that high detail and also the limitations of the computer hardware or the consoles that you're, or even mobile platforms that you're pushing the game out to. One way to overcome this is by using modular assets. So that's what this project is going to look at. Not 100%. I mean, modularity and using modular assets within video games is extremely important, and we will be talking about that in a lot more detail in the next video. This video is just going to show us the brief. So if we work through it from the very offset, you can see it's unit number 417, environment production for games. It is written and taught by me, Mike Acosta. If you do need to get hold of me by any reason, then there's my email address there. Most of you should already have that by now. So in this module, students will explore ways to construct a video game environment for use in a real-time game engine. For us, that's going to be Unity, or if you're feeling up for the challenge, then you can have a look at using Unreal if you'd like to. So moving from the previous module that you've done in year one, principles of modeling, you guys are going to be exploring the more high poly organic surface modeling. So that by we're looking at sort of vegetation and things like that, using the transparencies that we've used in principles for modeling, and then hopefully getting you guys into mudboxing, getting you to kind of play around with a bit more detail in your models, and exporting those texture maps. So you guys are going to be investigating level design. So in order for you to create a good, nice looking level, you need to be able to deconstruct what it is that you're going to build. By that, I'm talking about the modularity. Again, second video in this series, we'll talk about modularity, and we'll give you a bit more of a breakdown as to how you go about breaking a building up into its modular pieces. We'll also be looking at things like snapping. Unity has a very good ability to grab any vertice on your model and to use that as a point for snapping. So I'll be showing you that as well later on in this series. So you're going to be expected to model, to develop skills as a 3D modeler, specializing in outdoor and indoor locations. So you might want to design somewhere that literally is kind of a street view, or Piccadilly Circus, or Times Square in London. Obviously, there's a lot of buildings there and a lot of lights and things to worry about, so you might not want to go that big. Or you might just want to do a small interior, like a front room, or some kind of architectural sort of nice grandiose cathedral or something like that. A lot of it, as you might think, oh my god, that's going to be huge and too big. But when you start looking at how can you break it down, how many of these chunks are actually the same thing, you'll be quite surprised. So you'll also be looking at advanced lighting techniques, and by that I mean we're going to be looking at how do we bake our ambient occlusion onto our diffuse maps. And also we're going to be looking at PBR texturing as well, which brings in a whole new realm of beautifulness and of problems. So we're in this weird stage, or you guys are in the weird stage at the moment with video games, whereby we are seeing a lot more of the physically based rendering and physically based lighting in the scenes and in the games, but we're also still seeing a lot of the diffuse mapping and alpha and normal and specular and all of that. So you're having to learn both ways, and I'm sure that'll probably be the same case for the next couple of years, but it may well start moving more towards physically based lighting. So those are the things that we're going to be covering. So we're looking at modeling techniques for man-made and organic assets. So we'll have another look at how to do opacity maps. We'll have another look at how to use Mudbox, and we'll also be looking at how to do more hard surface modeling as well. Baking and texturing the lighting. So there's two different ways that we're going to be looking at doing that. One is in 3D Studio Max, where we're just going to render to texture, and then we're going to take the ambient occlusion map from that using a skylight in the scene. And the other one is that we can jump into Unity and we can use its baking tools in there. Advanced texturing. So we're looking at alphas, normals, and speculars. We haven't really touched on specular very much. We haven't really touched an awful lot on normal, other than using things like X normal. So it's at this point here. So normal and specular, here's where I want to kind of take us into Mudbox and kind of pull out some of these more detailed texture maps so that you can see how they work. So there'll be some training on that. PBR, I've already done a video on how to go from 3D Studio Max into Quixel. So that's the video that you want to look at for that. There may well be a second video looking at that in more detail, but for now, if you do want to look at the physically based rendering or physically based lighting, have a look at that 3ds Max to Quixel. It should be in the list. I'll put it into the Environment Productions classroom. Okay. So learning outcomes. You're looking at demonstrating skills for synthetic and organic modeling. So these are the things that I'm looking at when I'm looking to mark your work. So this is probably the most important section of this video. Demonstrating skills for synthetic and organic modeling. So that means that we want to see that you've able to create synthetic things such as hard surface things, so walls and floors and anything that is man-made. And then you've got your organic modeling as well. So we've got our trees and our shrubs and our foliage and things like that. So the organic one is probably the one that's a little bit more complex, a little bit more detailed. It takes a little bit more time and consideration when you're 3D modeling in order to model it correctly. So that's going to be the first thing that you need to demonstrate. Can you do synthetic and organic modeling, which I'm sure all of you can. Second thing for the learning outcomes, so the next thing I'll be looking to mark is, are you able to demonstrate that you've understood how to bake textures and bake lighting? So quite simply, if you can show me that you're able to render to texture, that you're able to export a ambient occlusion map, and that you're able to put that onto your diffuse map and you're able to see that it's adding that detail in, then that's fantastic. So one of the videos, I can't tell you which number, but one of the videos will show you how to do that. Learning outcome number 3, critically review their own concept creation and documentation. So this part is quite important. Critically reviewing your work is something that at any educational course that you're on will expect you to do. It isn't just to get you to write aimlessly. It's for us to understand that you've understood. So throughout this process, when you're coming up with the idea for the environment that you'd like to produce, when you're looking at the reference imagery, when you're looking at the first primary and secondary sources that you're going to use in order to create the environment that you've decided, all of it should be logged or blogged, or however you want to do it. That can be simply on the blog forums that you guys have already, or you can use a Word or Google Doc in order to track your progress. Essentially, you're creating a logbook of this is how I did this. So if anyone wants to look at and copy or to have a go at producing what you did, then they would be able to by following your logbook. Not completely, not 100%. I don't want it to be a step-by-step, then you do this, then you do that, but it should be one of those sort of almost like the fast-forward tutorials that you get on YouTube, where it says I did this and then I did this and then I did this. The key thing about all of it, and this is mentioned later on in the brief, is when you've completed your environment and you've done everything that you need to do, it's been submitted, the evaluation is important. And that is basically you telling me how you felt the module went, where you think you went wrong, where you think you went really well and correct. The last thing is obviously to demonstrate the creation of an environment from concept art. So key thing in that sentence there is the creation of an environment from concept art. So please make sure that you concept before you go out there and just start modeling. Make sure you get lots and lots of reference and do a mood board or do something to show that you've gathered these ideas from somewhere. 3 pieces of concept art I believe I'm expecting from you before you actually move on to 3D modeling. So looking at the brief in a little bit more detail now. So there's 2 tasks. Task number 1 is to 3D model an environment using modular design techniques. The building can be anything from Disney's infamous fairy tale castle to New York's Times Square. It's wise to choose very carefully. Some buildings are much easier to replicate than others, and build in sort of a modular fashion. So the prime example of that is the Taj Mahal. So if I just grab I think I've actually got a document with that on. Give me just a second, guys. Here it is. So the Taj Mahal is interesting because I don't know if you know your history behind it, but essentially it was built for his lover or his wife, and it's exactly the same on all 4 sides of it. So here you can see a breakdown. If I just turn off those rulers, here you can see a breakdown of someone who's looked at this and said, right, well, how much can I break this down by? So there's the entire block, right? And then you're thinking, okay, well, this column looks the same as this column. So perhaps can we start like knocking this down into, what bits are the same? So if we start removing certain other parts here, now I'm cutting it down to, well, this floor is the same as this floor, and this one is the same as this one. They are different. These ones have a different pattern on the inside than those ones. This whole section here is replicated on this side, on the back, and on this side, and then on the front. This top dome is slap bang in the middle of the Taj Mahal, so that only needs to be recreated once, whereas these guys here on the fronts and on the backs, obviously they're identical. As I said earlier, these long buildings, these sort of structures at the front or on the corners are on each corner, so they're identical. So somewhere like the Taj Mahal is quite nice because you can start quite cleverly breaking down the entire building, and you can see how it's modularly built. So you can see that you would only need to build one of these sections here, and then it can be slightly scaled and placed there, and it can be placed here. This section at the top there, let me just zoom in a little bit on this for you. So this section up here on the top, you can see that is the same on each platform. Looking around, you've got the dome here on the top of this one. That's going to be on the same on the top of that one there. This one is the only one that's really kind of on its own and completely by itself. Here we've got these pieces. So this actually is the same on all floors. The only difference that we've got down here is that there are sort of doorways in on these left-hand sides and right-hand sides there, which we don't have on the top. But if you're just building a simple 3D version of it, you wouldn't need to know that. So you can see that we're looking at, so we want a little bit of sort of grating there. We want a little bit of the top up here because that's going to be replaced and put in various places. You can see it's over there. You can see it's here. You just need to resize it. So these things essentially can just be replaced and put on top of there. So it's actually a really simple build, and no, I'm not taking any credit away from the the architects who built it. But for us, in terms of video games and in terms of can we break things down, modularity is a beautiful building to use. You can even see this section here in green is this sort of side piece which kind of runs all the way along the entire building, all the way around. So you would need to build this just once. Okay, so it's about how can I deconstruct a building. We can take this one even further, and then we can start saying, right, well, we actually only need to build half of one of these pieces. We only need to build half of one of those. We only need to build half of the amount of this that we had originally selected, half of that, half of this piece down here. So you can see how it's quite easy to break something down and think of it in terms of modularity. Even over here, we've only got half of one of those beams and half of the arch. So then you can just reverse it and do the other side of it. So the first task that you really have is to kind of look at, well, what building am I going to use and how am I going to break it down so that it's using modularity pieces. So the first thing that we'd like you to do is to, well, go ahead and choose which building it is you'd like to use, but you must submit at least 3 pieces of concept art for your scene. One of those has to be a lined, hand-drawn version of the building that you can draw it from the front and from the side, ideally. As you can see in the picture here, we've got a line drawing in the middle, and then we've got all the reference imagery that is going to link up with that building all the way around the outside. Okay, so that's important. This is the first thing that you need to do for us. Now, I would like the building to be something that does exist and can be found in real life. Or the other option is that you create a building that is sound in its structure, but you can take reference from 3, 4, 5 different buildings in order to create it. I hope that makes sense. What I don't want is a fantasy, floating, cloudy, weird building that wouldn't support itself. Okay, so it has to be something that is structurally sound. Okay, so task 1 is that. So it is to firstly produce the concept art for it, and then secondly to model it. Now, the modeling process, your triangle limit for this assignment is 30,000 triangles. Which is a nice figure. It should be, a good amount for you to, for those of you who want to create, Times Square or London's Piccadilly, then 30,000 is going to be quite tight. For those of you who just want to build, the Taj Mahal, for example, that 30,000 is probably going to be a lot easier for you to use. Texture limit, I'm limiting you to 4 2048 textures. Now, when I say that, those 4 textures, they have to include your normal and your specular. Okay, so essentially you have 2 diffuse textures. This is the way I would work it out, by the way. I'd have 2 diffuse textures at 2048. So long as I was using those to their full extent, and we're going to talk a lot about that in the next video. And then I would have 2, 1 for my normal and 1 for my specular. Okay. If you do want to break those textures down and use, 4 1024s instead of 1 of your 2048s, then that's absolutely fine. Or you can break it down even further and use 8 512s. That's fine as well. So task 2, this is the one that's a little bit more dull. It doesn't require you to do a little bit of writing, but it is part of the assignment and there's no getting away from it. Task 2 will ensure that the learning outcome critically review their own concept creation and documentation, and also the learning outcome demonstrate techniques for baking, texture and lighting is completed. Now, basically what I'm saying there is the reflective account. So from the very offset from, I'm going to do a modular environment based on London's Piccadilly Circus, right? That could be your first thing. As you move on from that, you need to critically review all of the concepts. So why are you picking certain buildings? What time area are you picking them from? All of that sort of information needs to be in there. how did you go about coming up with the design? How did you go about baking your lighting and your textures? How did you model it? What was your process? What were you doing with snapping vertices and things like that? So all of those things should be part of your blog and should be part of your how did I do this? Okay, so it's a real learning sort of curve and experience having to build things in a modular way. You will find that it's not as easy as it might seem from the offset. During the development of this environment, a reflective account via a blog, Word, or Google Doc is required. You must document the process of using modular design workflow and the various software and hardware used to create such an environment. Include images, videos, or audio of your progress. So if you want a video review or to record yourself as you're modeling, then that's fine. Review your concept art, show your understandings of synthetic and organic modeling, as well as your understanding of baking textures and lighting. Complete this reflective log with an evaluation. This is important. How it could have been improved, any areas that you're proud of, and why. Now, the full extent of this reflective account will be between 1,500 to 2,000 words. There's a very high chance that you're going to go over that limit because it's quite a large project, and you know, as you start typing in small doses, you'll quite quickly take up that word count. The submission for this module, you submit a final folder of work digitally to me, whether that is on the F drive, on the USB stick, on the classroom, or on a DVD clearly labeled. Folder should contain the following: a concept art and idea generation for the chosen environment. That's ×3, remember, concept art ×3. A completed render of the final environment, a wireframe render of the final environment. Again, there'll be a video on how to wireframe render. Include all texture maps and 3D files. For extra points or a higher grade, you could submit a series of images such as AO, wireframe, modular breakdown, and a production portfolio PDF to create a turnaround of buildings, showing their wireframes and their polished looks in one video. So you've all seen those videos where you've got a model and as it starts turning, it's got no textures on it, but then you start seeing the wireframe and then it carries on, it adds the texture in diffuse format, and then it adds a little bit of specularity and a bit of normal to it, and then the video adds a bit of lighting and it all looks beautiful. That is what I'm expecting if you want to hit those real high marks. Now, you don't have to do that to hit the distinction grade, but it will obviously help you because your presentation of your work will be much, much higher. The video that you create must be exported as a H.264 PAL and minimum of 720 for its size. If you want to go to 1080, that would be great. Just bear in mind it will take longer to render. Make sure that you're using correct naming conventions. This is one thing that people are letting me down on in the first year and the second year of this course. People are still forgetting to correctly name things and then just give me a folder with submitted written on it or something like that. Naming convention should always be surname, followed by your first name, followed by the module that it is that you're working on, followed by the name of whatever it is that you're submitting. Okay, so in this case, it'd be a custom mic, module 417 AAD _ famous building .mov. Any foliage or additional assets are only to be included if they're modeled and textured correctly. Quite obvious, really. I wouldn't want you to submit things that are going to bring the whole of the building or the whole of the environment down. However, do remember that you need synthetic and organic modeling within it. Okay, so that concludes the look at the brief. Here, I'm not going to read this out for you because it's quite a lot, but you can see the grading criteria and what's expected of you. And that is it. So the next tutorial or the next video in this series will be me talking to you a little bit more about modularity, what it is, and how we can set up our scenes in Photoshop and in 3D Studio Max to use a modular workflow. Okay, so that's the first tutorial, and I'll see you guys very soon.